up with you. Yeah, okay, everybody. I think we're going to get the show on the road. I know we're going to have people coming in, as we always do. It's lunchtime, so people are grabbing their lunch and they're going to join us. And I think a lot of people who come on to a lot of these, they know to time it so that the meat and potatoes starts after I do my intro stuff. So here we go. We'll get everything underway, because I'm so excited to have my friend and colleague Angela Champ with us. And Angela is the author of a couple of books, but this is her latest one, The Squiggly Line Career. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, is Squiggly Line Careers and everything career related. I'll just remind everybody, if this is your first time, we do keep the lines muted, but feel free to use the chat if you've got any questions. I like to think of this as Clubhouse with video. So if you've got questions for us, and if you're not familiar with Clubhouse, you got to get on it, because it's where everybody goes and has these interesting conversations. But we are here to really get your questions answered. So whatever you would like to talk about, that's what Angela and I are here to do. So I'm going to turn it over to Angela, who's going to start us off actually with the land acknowledgement. So Angela, over to you.
Thanks very much, Glain. And I do want to acknowledge that I am on the traditional territory of the Tsawwassen, Musqueam, and other Coast Salish peoples. And I'm very grateful to be here today and with you, Glain. It's always energizing for me to be in conversation with you. So really pleased to be here today.
Thanks so much. Well, I am thrilled to have you. And in Toronto, we are on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe tribes, as well as I'm sure several others. And again, terrific to be here with you. I'm really excited about this conversation. So let's set a bit of context for everybody first, though, for those of you who are on the call who maybe don't know much about you, Angela. Give us a quick 411 on how you where you started and how you came to write this book, which is one of my favorite career books, I have to say. So congratulations on that. But give us a little 411 on Angela's pathway to the Squiggly Line Career book.
Sure, thank you. So I'm in human resources right now, and a lot of people who are in human resources, they follow one of two paths. They either go to school and take a university degree or some sort of credentials in human resources, or they fall into human resources, and that's kind of how I did it. And I did it by way of squiggly path. So I graduated with an undergraduate degree in political science, intending to go to law school. I didn't get accepted to law school. You know, oh my gosh, my life was over. Thought it's okay, I'll go to the foreign, I'll be part of the Canada's Foreign Service. Wrote the Foreign Service exam, did really well, had an interview, didn't get hired. I thought, what am I going to do? And so I got hired into an insurance company, my first real job outside of university. And I got hired based on the fact that I could type 90 words a minute, which, by the way, I learned in grade 9. So sorry, Dad, but 4 years of university experience got me nothing for my first job. So I started actually as a mailroom clerk in an insurance company, and I stayed with the insurance company for 11 years, not as a mailroom clerk. I became a claims adjuster, bodily injury adjuster, fraud investigator, and then I moved into learning and development. And it was learning and development that, although I was still part of operations, that sort of opened my eyes into realizing what it is I really love to do. I left the insurance company after 11 years, and I joined a car rental company where I was the revenue manager for the West Division. And again, was able to do things that I realized I was actually quite good at. And I also really enjoy doing. I mean, what a thing, right? You're good at it and you like doing it. Went back, got my a master's degree, and then I joined a bank in Calgary. I moved to Alberta, where I worked in learning and development. It was my first job within human resources, but still in learning and development, not actually in human resources. But while I was doing that, I was writing my thesis for Petro-Canada, and it was a human resources strategy to attract and retain Indigenous peoples into the oil and gas sector. And so after I graduated, Petro-Canada actually hired me to implement the findings of my thesis. And that was my first real human resources job. So I was there for about 9 months when I got a call from an engineering firm saying they were looking for a new director of HR. And I thought, yep, I've got about 9 months of HR experience. I can do this. And so I became their director of human resources, eventually became their vice president of human resources. And then fast forward, here I am today. So it was, doesn't make sense when you just see it on paper, but if you really delve deeply into it, it actually all makes sense because everything built on the thing before it.
Yeah, it's like a thread, right? That
It
kind
is
of
a
goes
thread.
through. I can totally relate.
Yeah.
I had my own squiggly line career, so yeah, it's funny to see where I started and where I am now. You go, what? How did that happen? But that's the thing. So we're here to talk about careers and career changing and career management and all things career related. And when we were doing our prep call, because we set this up actually several months ago, and then we had another call kind of more recently. And one of the things that was emerging that I wanted to actually, lead off with was really how the pandemic has affected how people are thinking about their careers. And I'm curious what you
Mhm.
noticed, because I'm noticing some shifts and would love to hear what you're observing in terms of how people are thinking about their careers these days.
Definitely, and I'm sure a lot of the participants on this call can relate to this. When the pandemic first started, so I'm just going to say roughly March 2020, because it's when a lot of jurisdictions and countries went into lockdown, even though it was circulating before that. Uh, Suddenly, I'm not going to say that P word that everybody detests. So suddenly, everybody had to change how they were doing business. Organizations that never believed in work from home or remote working suddenly had to send their people home. They had to figure
Mm,
out the technology. They had to figure out how they were going to bring people back to the office if they had to. People who were frontline workers had to work under different conditions. And it created a real pressure cooker in the working environment, regardless of what jurisdiction you're in. And what I noticed around April or May is there were some things happening. At the end of every year, as we approach the new year, I noticed that a lot of people start thinking, oh, is this all there is in life?
mm,
And a lot of career change decisions happen around like between Christmas and New Year. You'll notice there's a lot more of an uptick in resignations or people changing
yeah.
jobs just after the new year because they have that thought. Well, what I noticed is that around April, May of 2020, and then going into as the pandemic progressed, people were still doing that. They were thinking, oh, is this really what I want to do? And there were two things that were spurring that. One is with the pandemic, lots of people getting sick. Unfortunately, people dying, things
Mm,
shutting down. People thought, you know what, life's too short. I need to do
yeah.
it now. So people who had put their dreams or desires on hold decided, I'm going to do it now because who knows when I'm going to do it. The other thing that was spurring this thought about career change is that people realized that their companies were not treating them well.
Mm,
So during the pandemic, when there was a lot of things uncertain, a lot of companies were still not treating their employees well or not looking out for the well-being of their employees. And people thought, you know what, life's too short to put up with this. And so I think both of those things, starting from March 2020, were really spurring people to have a thought about, is it time for me to make a career change, an
mhm.
industry change, a profession change? And I've noticed definitely an uptick since then.
Yeah, it's interesting because the New York Times wrote an article recently called the YOLO economy, right? Like
Mhm,
you only live
mhm.
once. And a lot of people are really sort of thinking, even like a year, it's almost like with a year later and having sat on a bunch of cash because
Mhm.
nobody's been traveling, they've got a little
Yeah.
bit more in the bank. We can start to make some of those choices. Yeah, it's so interesting. So it's going to be interesting to see, like, as somebody who's in HR, who's constantly looking for talent, I guess is that changing how you're thinking about recruiting, retention? What are some things that you're thinking about? Because I know there's a number of leaders that are probably sitting on this call going, "Ooh, okay, what do I need to start worrying about? In terms of people checking out or moving on. What's on your mind, and what are strategies that you're starting to think about?"
Yeah, if you're a leader or somebody who's looking to retain your employees, I would definitely look around and say, what are the programs and practices you have in place that would encourage somebody to stay with your organization? So
Mm,
I always say that employee engagement is a combination of three things: that you feel connected, so connected to maybe the purpose of your company or connected to your colleagues or connected to somebody, that you feel like you're competent, that the work that you do you're actually good at or can become good at it, and that you feel that you're contributing, that the work that you're doing matters to somebody, to a client, to your boss, to your colleague, that the work you're doing. And so I would, if I was a leader and I'm looking around saying, am I going to hang on to these people in this sort of as we're coming out of the pandemic, I would look to say, do we have the right practices in place in order to make people feel like they're connected, contributing, and competent? As somebody who's looking to hire people, or if you're looking to hire people, I always look look for people, regardless of their background, on, first of all, do they have the aptitude? They don't necessarily have to have the experience, but do they have the aptitude to do it? For example, I am not detail oriented at all. I could do it. I could do it if I had to, but it's not my strength. And so probably I should not be a NASA engineer where a decimal point can make a difference between life and death. That's not my aptitude. And so I'm not actually, I shouldn't apply for that job, and I shouldn't be hired for it. But look for the aptitude. And once you've got the aptitude, look for things like, does the person show learning agility? Do they have good and strong emotional intelligence? Because that is half the
Yeah.
battle. Somebody who's got good, I know you and I have talked about emotional intelligence before, right? I mean, I could go on for hours on this one.
Yeah.
Do they have a growth mindset, or do they think this is it? I'm 30 years old or 40 years old or 50 years old or 91 years old, and this is it. What I know is all I'm going to know. No, we keep learning because the world is evolving and changing. And so that's the kind of people that I look for. And I think that a lot of organizations who are progressive, they look for
Mhm.
that maybe more so than experience.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny how, when we're talking about where are we now versus where we used to be, because I can remember I'm Gen X. I mean, we're both Gen X, right? And I remember the message that was given to us when we came out was really about, like, because that was still the year of the people getting their 25-year watch and,
Right.
service awards and all that kind of good stuff. And I can remember really getting a lecture early on that jumping around wasn't good. Like, I remember my dad saying, you can show tenacity by the longer you stay at something. Like, this was sort of the mindset around work and careers. Um, you know, how has that changed over the years in terms of, do you think that has shifted now? Like, do you think the moving around is less of a detriment, or is there still a tipping point that as employers or as when we're hiring that we should be looking for a little bit of staying power? What's your thought on that? I'm
I
curious.
think, yeah, what a great question. I think Gen X was the first
Mm.
generation that did have that, where they were jumping around. Part of it was the dissatisfaction. No, we didn't want to wait 25 years for that first promotion, right? Whereas I think the generation before ours, they were content to wait and put and do their dues and put in their time. And now you have the Gen Y and even the Gen Z or Gen Z, depending on how where you live, where there is no job security in many cases. There's a gig economy, so lots of people having part-time or at-will work. People who decide that they want to take 6 months to go skiing, and so
Mhm.
you see a lot more of it. I would say it's half and half. You've got people who get nervous when they see a resume with what they see as a job jumper, and
Mhm.
other people are actually willing to invest the time to ask the candidate or do some dig and say, why do you have such short stints in your in on your resume? I think it's incumbent on hiring managers to look and actually dig for the story. If you look at my resume, although I spent 11 years in one company and 7 years in another company, I have a number of 18 to 24-month stints, and you think, oh, what's wrong? Like, why did you? But if you actually hear the story of how it came, it all makes sense. I was actually talking to somebody last week, though, and this is what we face: is somebody applied for a job, and the employer asked, "Why is there a gap in your, like, why have you not been working since April of 2020?" I thought, do you know there's a pandemic on, and
Mm.
that lots of businesses closed and people
Mm.
downsized? Like, I think you need to be sensitive and aware of what was happening in
Mhm.
that place at that time. Because if you're looking at people's resumes right now and there's a gap since 2020, you might think that the pandemic had something to do with it. Certainly, if you're
Mhm.
looking at candidates who are from Calgary, Alberta, where they've been in an economic downturn for many years, and you see that they've got a gap in their resume, might have something to do with it. So you need to apply some thought to why, and not just make assumptions about the
Mhm.
candidate. I think people are 50-50. Some people are like, yep, it's the sign of the times, and other people are like, oh no, there's something wrong with this candidate. And I think those people who say there's something wrong with the candidate without digging further,
Mm.
I think they lose out on a lot of good candidates. Not to say that there aren't some terrible job jumpers. Sometimes people have short stints because they're not great employees, but take
Mhm.
the time to dig into it and find out why before you make an assumption.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice. And I mean, one of the backbone, I think, things around your book, The Squiggly Line Career, is this idea of being willing to take some risk with your career, right? Like,
Hmm.
it's really about, So trying some things that may be off the beaten path a little bit, going in a different direction. And I think career risk is something, people have different tolerance levels around risk. So what could you say to somebody maybe who's listening right now, who's maybe interested in doing something new, but the risk factor feels high? Like, what advice would you give, or what experience could you share around making the leaps that feel a little risky?
I think like financial comfort around risk, or risk means something different to other people, right? When
Mm,
you go and you invest your money, they make you take that quiz to see what your risk level is, your tolerance
yes.
for how much money you can lose if you're going to lose it, right? Before they invest your money. And also, if you're going to go out and do some outdoor adventure, one person's risk might be taking a hike for 2 hours with no bathroom nearby. Another person might be bouldering with no net underneath, right? So the
Mm,
definition of risk is different. So I would say, first of all, if you're somebody who feels it might be a little bit risky, say, how can you identify what risky means to you? Does it
yeah.
risky mean quitting your job with no other job to go to and moving to another city? Kind of like I did in 2005. Literally, I quit my job and moved to Alberta. Or does it mean sending a resume for a job that you're not quite sure that you're qualified for? So measure your level of
Mhm.
risk. And I would say if it feels slightly uncomfortable, a little bit out of your comfort zone, go for it. If it's something where you feel I have no safety net, and if this fails, I will literally like do the and then what exercise. So if you apply for a job and you don't get it, and then what? Well, I still have a job, and then what? So do the and then what? And if
Mhm.
you find that the end result is okay, go for it.
Mhm.
Um, if you're a little bit nervous about it, is there a job or a different role you can take within your own organization just to
Mhm.
help you get out of that whatever your current role or your current department is?
Yeah.
Is there a volunteer role that you can take that might give
Mm.
you skills in a different complete area? So I, for example, in human resources, I volunteer. I'm doing project management in a facilities for one organization, and for another one, I'm doing marketing. So I'm doing something that's not even related. Well, it is kind of related, but because everything's interrelated. But
Mhm.
do volunteer. Can you volunteer for to be on a committee at work?
Mhm.
Um, the other thing I would say is if you think you've only got half of the qualifications for a job, apply anyway, because you never know. Sometimes
Mm.
there's a little bit of luck involved, sometimes there's a little bit of timing involved. But what sometimes we think, oh, you know what? I don't have everything they're looking for. Believe me, almost no organization knows exactly what they're looking for. And sometimes when they meet the right candidate, they're willing to make a change for that candidate. So it's never as risky as you think it's going to be. And if it really is, if you think I can't do this without a safety net, then make a plan. And the plan might be I'm going to save 10% of my salary for the next 6 months so that if I have to leave my job and try something new, I actually have a cushion so that I'm not lying awake at night worrying about how to pay my bill. So you can make a plan for how to take a risk down the road. It doesn't have to
Mhm.
all be spontaneous and earth shattering.
So true. And I think sometimes when we're looking at taking a risk, we get so fixated on what we think we're going to lose or what we think we're
Hmm.
going to give up that we close the door on what's waiting on the other side, right? So what talk to me about what's a risk that you took in your career that really did kind of get you bottled up, and what was your learning from taking that risk? What did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, I mentioned a moment ago. So in 2000, so I had a job here in Vancouver.
Mm,
It was a good job. I could have stayed. It was a large national company, and I decided that I was going to move to Calgary because my then the person I was dating lived in Calgary, and I was living in Vancouver. We were doing something long distance, and at the time, the Alberta economy was just booming, and here was just so and so. And I
mm,
thought, you know what I'm going to do? We were kind of at the stage where we thought we're going to take that next step in our relationship. So either he moves here or I'm going to move there.
mhm.
So I quit my job, my steady,
Yeah.
could have stayed there for the rest of my life job. And I moved to a city where the only person I knew was him. I didn't have any friends there. I had no connections there. I didn't have a job. I was still doing my school part-time. I thought, oh, like that was a big leap. I thought that was pretty
Mm,
courageous, but I saw it as an adventure. It did keep me up at night because I thought, okay, well, I have no job. I have to now pay half the rent. And so it was a little concerning, but again, you make a plan. I thought, okay, I need to start meeting people and networking, particularly those that are calling in from Alberta, Calgary, and Edmonton. You know, a lot of Alberta is about networking. And
mm,
so I went to an event. First person I met, I'm like, hey, I'm new to Calgary. Who should I be talking to?
mm,
And it started me like, oh, you need to talk to this person, who said, oh, you need to talk to that person, who said, oh, you need to talk to that person, which landed me a job. And so I won't say it wasn't without its anxiety. You know, I was trying to conserve my money. I didn't do very much that cost money because I didn't want to eat up my cushion. I thought, am I going to find a job? I don't know anybody. I have no friends here. I have no support network here. But it turned out to be a really fun adventure that lasted 13 years before I moved
mm.
back. So turned out okay.
I love it. I love it. And I love the, I think the thing too, when we make these kind of career moves, we're often, what that allows us to do is usually vault to the next opportunity in a way that we didn't necessarily envision or imagine,
Yeah.
right? So as you think about, you know, I think one of the things that I've seen in my coaching practice anyway is that I've often seen people who've been very, very successful. They've had a very successful career trajectory and they've never failed before. And I'm always a little worried about that because I feel like they've kept themselves too comfortable. They haven't done enough
Mm.
career risks. And and I've actually seen people who've then had a big failure and boy, at the age of like 50 or mid 40s, and it's really knocked them down to their knees because they haven't really built up that resilience. What advice would you have for people to get a bit of, like not if you've been cruising along on your career path, what advice would you have to somebody to build up that resilience? Because I feel like resilience is such an important thing for anybody navigating career, especially career these days where it's so volatile, right?
Oh, Glain, you are so right. And resilience is important in order to weather those ups and downs. It's like,
Mm,
when you lift weights in order to build muscle tone, the way that you build a muscle tone is the lifting of the weight actually causes little tears in your muscle that then repair and
mhm.
become stronger. And so you need those tears in the fabric or in the muscle
I
in
didn't
order to
know
be.
that. That's such a great
Yeah.
analogy.
I'm sure I didn't use the scientific term, so anybody who's in science, I'm sorry for not explaining it well enough, but that's what happens. And so you
Mhm,
you do need those tears in the
mhm.
fabric or in the muscles in order to become more resilient in life, whether you're talking about your muscles or whether you're talking about your psyche. And when you're right, when you're talking about somebody who has not struggled with or had a setback in the career, it says that they haven't taken enough risks or
Right.
that they've actually had a little bit of luck where things actually have gone their way, or maybe a combination of both. This is why a lot of people talk about, today's children. Don't coddle your children too much. Let them
Right.
fail. You
Oh
don't have
my
to do
gosh.
it.
Over
Yeah.
coddling. Such a
Right.
problem. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Have you read the Coddling of the American Mind? Is such a good book. I totally recommend it. Oh, I also recommend your book too. If you haven't picked up Glein's book, make sure you read Glein's books, because there's two of them. But you're right. They're out of their comfort zone.
Mm.
And if you've reached your 50s and you haven't had a setback or what you think is a
Oh
setback,
boy.
it,
It's
it
tough.
will it will it will hit you hard. And so what I would say is mentally prepare that everyone fails in life at least once, most of us many times, as we should, because that's where the growth happens. and
Hmm.
and ask yourself, if I haven't failed, have I actually been growing, or have I just been cruising? And so again, take a calculated risk, apply for a job or for a board position or for a volunteer position that you might not get. And if you don't get it, ask yourself, was it the end of the world? Probably it wasn't the end of the world.
Hmm.
Think about other times if you've had career success where maybe you didn't have other success. Maybe you got a failing grade in school. Maybe you asked somebody out on a date and they said no. I mean, there have to be some times that you've had that things did not go your way. And look, you survived it. But
Yeah.
building resilience really is about getting out of your comfort zone, understanding that even when you fail, it's mostly not the end of the world. There are some failures that could kill you, but those are rare. Those are
Yeah,
not
yeah, yeah.
everyday failures, right? And that if you see it as a growth opportunity, I think this is, I think, is attributed to the Dalai Lama. He says, when you lose, don't lose the lesson. So when you
Mm,
fail, when you lose, don't lose the lesson. What are you meant to learn from that, and how
yeah.
can you apply it going forward? Yeah.
I love that. And I think sometimes too, like you could build, what you're making me think of is you can build your failure muscle by taking on something that you don't know how to do. Like I don't know how to ice skate as an adult, and
Yeah.
I could start learning how to ice skate and fall on my butt, although I'd be afraid of breaking something at this age. But anyway, I think there's ways that you can build that muscle
Yes.
so that you have it. But boy, I really do. I've seen that happen to a few of my clients where they sailed through, and it was really devastating them when they that first time they didn't get the job they wanted, or they didn't get the promotion they wanted.
I love what you said about ice skating. Is, first of all, you could wear pads because that's how you can calculate the risk,
I will
right?
need a lot of pads.
That's okay. That's all right. They've got bubble wrap and everything. But what a great example, which is learn something new. In
Mm,
2020, I had a New Year's resolution prior to the pandemic starting that I would learn one new thing every single week for 52 weeks.
wow.
Just as a lark.
Yeah,
Everything from like the first thing I did was my dad taught me how to play a Greek version of backgammon
nice.
called tavli. And that was the very first thing. And it was fun. And it's like, okay, I'd never, I watched my dad play all, my whole life. I'd never learned. It looked like fun, right? Because it's a very like very vocal game. You don't just
Yeah.
play very stately. Um, but there was like knitting and skateboarding and learning Italian, and guess what? I am not good at a lot of those things. One of the things I said I was going to learn was a Bruno Mars dance routine. Now, there's something you need to know about me. I love to dance. I love to dance, and if money were no object, that's all I would do is I would dance. But I'm really good at Greek folk dancing. I know you don't see that a lot around here. You don't see it on like, so you think you can dance. I'm really good at Greek folk dancing. I'm really bad at almost every other kind of dancing. And so I
Right.
thought, I'm going to learn a Bruno Mars routine. Well, I think my daughter's still laughing at that. I look
Oh my God.
ridiculous. I look ridiculous. I never did quite master it because I'm not that coordinated. But man, was it fun. And that's it. If you think, like somebody look at me and say, well, she failed. She failed at learning the Bruno Mars routine. No,
Mm,
actually, I didn't, because I had a ton of fun. I did
mhm,
learn something. I learned that I'm
mm.
actually not very good at it, but it doesn't matter. It didn't matter. I just tried it anyway. And that's how you build that failure muscle.
Yeah, you're bringing me back to you're having me have a PTSD flashback to the time that I took beginner Beyonce. It was just a disaster. Anyway, we
That
won't
sounds
go
like
there.
fun.
But anyway, folks on the call, if you've got some questions for Angela, now is the time. Start putting them in the chat or put them in the Q&A, and I'll start watching out for that. But sort of on the flip side, so well, I don't know if is it on the flip side to risk taking, and maybe it's why people don't take risk, is this notion of imposter syndrome. And I have to tell you, Angela, we talked about imposter syndrome in the pre-call, and you are the first person that I've ever spoken to that said to me, Glain, I don't have imposter syndrome. And I want you to, and those of you on the call who don't know what imposter syndrome is, let me give you the definition. It's kind of like when you come home from work every day and you go, oh, thank God I fooled them again, right? Like you have this feeling that they are going to find you out for being the great fraud that you are, right? And, as I said, I've talked to many, many, many leaders, and everybody sort of says to me, oh yeah, that imposter syndrome is so true, except for Angela. So when we talked about it, I'd love you to share with the audience what your take on imposter syndrome is and how you've personally reframed it for yourself, because I thought it was quite interesting.
Yeah, so many people, mostly women, but sometimes men talk about imposter syndrome. And I'm like, no, I don't relate to that. And I actually have the opposite. I don't want to call it cheerleader syndrome, because syndrome means illness or ailment. So I'm going to call
Mm,
it like cheerleader condition strength. cheerleader strength, where when I do something, I take a new job, I apply for a new job, I take a new job, I learn it, I learn a Bruno Mars routine. Instead of thinking, oh, I can't do this, everybody's gonna figure out I'm a fraud. I'm like, yeah, you can do this, go for it. Like I'm the person saying, like, I talk to myself the way I talk to my friends. I'm like, yeah, you can do this. You should totally do this. This will be so
Mhm.
much fun. You should absolutely try. Why not? Why not you? And this is how this
Mm.
is the dialogue that's going on in my head. I know for a lot of people, the dialogue is like, oh, you can't do this. They're going to figure you
Mhm.
out. And I'll just say this, if you have a friend or you're in a relationship with a partner or you have a parent who every day tells you, you know what, you're a fraud, you cannot do this, who do you think you are? If you actually have somebody in your life who's saying that to you, you need to get out of that relationship, because that relationship is toxic. And so
Mhm.
why would you put that up? Why would you put up with that from yourself if you
Mhm.
wouldn't put up with it from somebody else? Like, don't put up with that.
Mhm.
So for me, imposter syndrome, when I hear people say that they have imposter syndrome, I always say to them, don't confuse feeling overwhelmed because you're new at something, new at a job, new at a hobby, or that you're not an expert at it yet, with being an imposter or a fraud. If
Mhm.
you have a learning agility or a growth mindset, what you say is, I don't know how to do this yet.
Yes.
I'm not an
Mhm.
expert in this yet. It doesn't mean I'm a fraud. It doesn't mean I don't know what I'm doing or won't know what I'm doing. Maybe I
Mhm.
don't know what I'm doing right now, but I'll eventually know how to do. And in 2008, when the financial crisis hit, there was a book, maybe you've read it, by Alan Ross Sorkin, called Too Big to Fail. And he talked about
Mhm.
how the major banks in the United States dealt with, or what led to the crisis. And I was reading, I don't know if you read it, but as I was reading, I thought, these guys are not smarter than me. Like, I was reading what all of these decisions that led to this financial crisis that crippled the world. It crippled the
Mhm.
world. I'm like, these guys were making like dumb decisions, just like everybody else around me. And
Yeah.
so for me, I think, well, I'm as smart as them, or they're as smart as me. And so why would I feel like an imposter? I'm like, go for it. Let's do this. We can do this.
I love it. And you must have had fantastic parents. So I'm loving that your dad's on the call, because I think he needs a big shout out for instilling that within you. Because I think
It's
a lot of,
true.
when I talk to people who have imposter syndrome, usually the voice in their head is one of their parents that's, knitting on them all the time. So
I did. My parents always said I could do whatever. When I said I'm going to do this, my dad would say, "Why not?" I'm like,
yeah,
"Why
that's
not? Indeed.
fantastic.
Why not? Why
And
not?"
that, I think that's a great message for all of us on the call who are parents, to kind of think about how we bring that into the
Yeah.
conversation. Okay, so Nancy's got a question here, and she said, "How did you start to begin to oversee the other areas of HR in your career, coming out of primarily the OD piece?" So you kind of went into OD from your insurance background, gone into L&D, sorry, not OD, L&D. What were the challenges and what were the wins that you had?
Thanks, Nancy. So I actually talk about this whole process in my book, about how I ended up there, because on paper it doesn't make sense, but when you walk through it, it actually does make sense. And what happened was two things. One, I was able to translate the skills I had gained in other roles to what I was doing in HR. So, for example, I was a claims adjuster, and in British Columbia, for those of you that are here, you know that we're public insurance, and your insurance policy is a piece of legislation called the Insurance Motor Vehicle Act. And so when I worked as a claims adjuster, I would literally have to open up the act and read what section you would be covered under in order to process your claim, right? Well, what's human resources? Employment Standards Act, Privacy Act, Human Rights Code, Labor Relations Act. It's all legislation. So I already knew how to read legislation because I did it as an insurance adjuster, and I just applied it to um, HR. The second example or transferable skill, before I talk about the rest of it, was when I worked before I quit and moved to Alberta, I worked for a car rental company, and I was the revenue manager. So my job was to create incentive programs and coach frontline car rental clerks,
Yeah.
associates, on how to do incremental sales. So would you like an upgrade? Would you like gas with that? Would you like the coverage, right? Those of you that have rented a car, you know what I'm talking about. And so I went from being able to put together incentive programs and coaching and translate that to compensation programs,
Mm.
salary reviews, and coaching in human resources. So you see how a skill in one role actually was directly transferable, even though I didn't have the job title. And the
Mhm.
second part that helped me transition to human resources was that when I was doing my master's thesis, I did it on a human resources strategy to attract and retain Indigenous employees in the oil and gas. And because the research was all around human resources strategy, again, I was able to translate the theoretical part of what I was doing to a role in human resources in conjunction with the experience I had in other roles. So it wasn't a like for like. I didn't take human resources education and then work in human resources and then go up. I was able to translate my skills directly to what I wanted to do in human resources. And that could apply to anybody for any role. You don't have to have the job title to be able to do the job.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's great advice. And it's kind of, Lisa's got a question here, and I think there's probably some of the things in your answer, but let's see if you've got some additional thoughts for Lisa. So she's saying, I'm currently trying to pivot industries, and I'm finding I keep observing two things. One, recruiters are more interested in offering me opportunities in my old industry rather than my new one. And two, I can get pretty far down the interview process with my new industry, but in the end, somebody with an already established industry experience ultimately gets the job. What can I do to help recruiters, employers be more willing to take a risk on a newbie? This whole transferring into new industries, that's a tricky one. So what advice, you've done it many times.
Mhm.
What advice would you have?
So right now, it's a little bit more challenging, and there's a lot of people looking for work because of the pandemic. Businesses have closed down or downsized, and so the one of the realities you're facing right at this moment is that there's a lot more competition. So it's a bit of an employer's market. That's not meant to discourage you. That's just meant to create some a baseline of a foundation of understanding for what you need to do if you want to get there. If you're looking to switch industries, but in the same profession. So for example, I've worked in insurance, in banking, in oil and gas, in engineering, in geomatics, in construction, in car rental, and now in commercial cleaning. So I've switched industries, but I've had different jobs and I've had the same job. So I've been in human resources for the last 10 years of my career, but before that I was in different industries, but in different roles, claims adjuster, revenue manager, et cetera. So if you're looking to switch industries, but in the same role, say you're a human resources professional looking to go to that industry, or you're a marketing professional or accounting professional, then what I would do is I would do some research on that industry and talk about how my strengths in my current profession can help the pain points of that organization in that industry. So you need to do some research on the company or the industry to find out what's happening, not just now, but what's projected for a year, 3 years from now, and how can the skill and the experience that you bring help that company in that industry succeed. If you're looking at completely switching professions like I did, I went from claims adjuster to revenue manager and operations to human resources. So I switched professions, not just industry. Then what you want to do is you want to make it as easy as possible for the recruiter and the hiring manager to consider you by connecting the dots. Do not just send a resume. If you can at all, either through the ATS or through some personal connection, send a cover letter, include a cover letter that doesn't just regurgitate what's on your resume, but says, you're looking for this, and I offer you this. You're looking for this, and I've done this. Almost all of the jobs that I have found where I've switched industries, where I had zero industry, I've been able to show how the experience I had before directly correlated with what they were looking for. In other words, I made it very easy for that hiring manager or that recruiter to consider me because I didn't make them try and figure out through my resume why I might be a good candidate. I actually told them why I was a good candidate. The third thing I'll just recommend is that when you're looking to switch industries, and it's a bit of a long game for you, make sure that you're making connections in that industry, whether it's a recruiter in that industry or somebody in operations or somebody from that company or that industry that you're interested in, who can not only tell you kind of a little bit of intel about how to get into that industry, but can also advocate for you. So if you know the recruiter or you know somebody in operations or somebody from that company or that industry, you can say, hey, Bob, I'm interested in getting, what suggestions do you have? Or do you have anybody that you can introduce me to? Sometimes having those personal connections really can make a big difference. I'm not saying it's the only way, but it's one more layer that will help you do that. And making those connections now with LinkedIn, asking people for a virtual coffee. In fact, that's one of the ways that I know Glain is through virtual coffees like this. We've only actually met once in person, and it was
Yes.
many years ago, not even in Canada. We were in the United States where we met at a conference, but I'd
Yeah.
already knew her from before. So don't discount the power of the virtual coffee, and don't just ask somebody right away for a job. It needs to be a reciprocal relationship. You're not just asking them for help, you're also offering help as well, whether that's an article they might be interested in or something like that.
I want to kind of dig into this a little bit more because I think one of the things, and we met through, I think it was LinkedIn initially. I can't
Yes,
remember how we got connected on LinkedIn, but we
yes.
ended up having some nice back and forths, met at a conference, and then actually did see you again a second time, which was at the awards program in
Ah,
Toronto a
yes,
couple of years
that's
ago too.
right.
Remember?
I forgot
Um,
about that. Yeah.
yeah. So, but I think you do, like I'm in, as an entrepreneur, I'm having to be on social. I'm doing all the things that I need to do to build my profile and all of that kind of stuff for the roundtable. But I think you do such a masterful job as somebody who isn't looking to have their own business, but is actually, just actively out there putting out your ideas as an HR leader, building your personal brand on LinkedIn. And I think a lot of people don't utilize this platform at all effectively. Like I've had clients that have actually had calls from recruiters, and the recruiters have said to them, I wasn't going to call you based on your LinkedIn profile. And, because they slapped it up on LinkedIn 10 years ago and they've never done anything with it since, right?
Mm.
So for people who maybe aren't very active on LinkedIn or don't know how to go about building their brand, are there a couple of tips that you would give them that you found have really helped you kind of build out that network and also build your own personal brand and expertise?
I get asked this question a lot from job seekers, and I say to them, like you said, first of all, make sure your LinkedIn is up to date.
Mm,
Have a good about profile summary that's up to date. Make sure that all of the roles that you want to showcase or your career is on there. Your education, whatever might differentiate you from other candidates, languages that you speak or volunteer positions. Make sure that you are updating it, and make sure you have a professional photograph. I see a lot of people,
mm,
with their wedding photo, which they look gorgeous. Yes, you do look gorgeous, but it's really, think of it as a professional platform that is about your brand as opposed to something like Facebook. Um, what I recommend to people when they're, particularly if they're job seeking, but anyway, because you just never know when you're going to be job seeking, right? You should
mhm.
always be prepared to lose your job. Always have your resume updated. Always have your skills up to date. And so, what I suggest is post at least once a week. And posting can be sharing an article that you found interesting with a little bit of a blurb about why you found it interesting, commenting on somebody's status or post. You could comment on something, and always try and keep it positive. Please, this is not the time to troll people on LinkedIn.
Oh my gosh,
Don't
trolling
troll
on
people anyway.
LinkedIn.
Yeah, don't troll people anyway, but especially
Ah,
not on LinkedIn, because recruiters pay attention to that. Hiring
mhm,
managers pay
mhm,
attention to that, or posting thoughts on your own. So for me, one of the reasons why I'm so active on LinkedIn is because many years ago I had this great boss, and he challenged us to create our own personal mission statement. So when I was in my very early 20s, my mission statement became to inspire others to achieve their best potential. I have never wavered from that, even though I've grown and changed and I'm not in my early 20s anymore. That still resonates for me. It's still, I feel, my reason for being. So everything I do, I try to align it with that personal mission statement of inspiring others to achieve their best potential. So how do I best do that? I love to share thoughts and ideas. I like to challenge people. And so I put a lot of posts on LinkedIn, either my own thoughts or sharing other people's thoughts, because I'm always trying to inspire people to that best potential. It's also why I wrote that book, the most recent one, the Squiggly Line Career, because I want to do that. So find what's important to you. Do you want to be seen as an expert in your field? And so post things about what you know about, or what's happening in your industry, or what the challenges are going to be, or what's new. If you want to get into a new field, also start posting about stuff that's happening there. Talk about stuff that's happening with your alumni, whatever you're comfortable with, but for the purpose that you do. You want to make sure that you are active enough on LinkedIn so that if anything does happen, you lose your job, your company shuts down, you get acquired and they do a downsizing, that you're ready. You don't want to be somewhere where you realize, oh my gosh, I have not updated my resume in 10
Yeah.
years and I've never interviewed for 10 years. That's a really tough place to be because it's a steep learning curve to get from 10 years to where you need to be right now. You should, every 6 months, you should be looking at your resume and saying, what one new thing could I add? What new skill? What new job responsibility? What new credential or uh, course? And if there's nothing, if you haven't done anything for 10 years, start doing it now because you
Yeah.
need to do it.
Well, the other thing that this just makes me think of, I think most people, like if you think about our careers, right? So we go to school and all of us are in the same boat when we're finishing up our university, college, whatever you've done, right? You're all just about, I need a job, right? Like everybody just wants to get that first job. And so you get the first job. And then like I know from my own experience was then I got that first job, which wasn't my dream job. It was just I needed a job to pay my rent,
Right.
right? Then you suddenly go, okay, what's next, right? And I think, one of the things that as you're talking, I think a lot of people are not strategic about their careers. So how wonderful for you that you had that opportunity to kind of create this personal mission statement, which is a really encompassing mission statement that you can kind of apply to any role. It's not
Mhm.
role specific, it's really life specific,
Yeah.
right? And I think what I think about for many people is what the focus becomes is the next rung on the ladder, as opposed to directionally where they want to take their life and career being part of that, right? And I know for many people the thought of doing like a career vision, like when you say to people, where do you want to be in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, people are just like, I don't know, like I have no idea. So what advice do you have for people to become a little bit more strategic? Because I think then once you're clear on that, then your choices around what course to take, what do I want to post on LinkedIn, do I want to take this job opportunity or not, become very, very clear when you've got that direction clearly in your mind, right? How can people get started on that for themselves?
I think for some people, when they think they need to be strategic in their career, they think that it needs to be perfectly mapped out. So I'm going to start as a
Mhm.
junior underwriter, and within 2 years I'll be an intermediate underwriter, and then within 2 years after that I'll be a senior underwriter, and within 5 years I'll be a manager of underwriter, and then I'll be a vice president. They think that it means really understanding and then having like, I need to be a vice president by the time I'm 40. Why? Why does it have to be 40? Why
Right.
can't it be 35? Why can't it be 45? Why can't it be 65? Right? And so people said they think that being strategic means having a very specific and dedicated, but there's so much in the world that happens that's beyond your control, including you don't know 10 years from now or 20 years from now what jobs will be available. I'm I'm not saying that any of you should pursue this as a career, but who even heard of an influencer
Yeah,
10 years ago, right? Like honestly, who
very
ever heard of
true. Or a
who
Zoom producer.
right, a Zoom producer. Who heard about a digital marketer 20 years ago,
Right.
right? It didn't exist.
Yeah.
Even now, like with the pandemic, now you've got people who are actually specializing on creating professional interactive events over Zoom.
Yeah.
A year ago that didn't happen
Yeah.
because people tried to do in-person stuff. So when you have when you're being strategic in your career, it's not really about giving yourself a timeline that says in 2 years I'm going to be a such and such, and in 5 years I'm, because there's a little bit out of your control. You don't know if you're going to find the right role. The other thing it does is it closes you off.
Mhm.
Maybe following that path isn't the right path for you. When I became a mailroom clerk in the insurance company because I needed a job and it was the only one that was hiring, and I
Mhm.
got it based on my ability to type 90 words a minute. Like, come on. But when I was there, it gave me a chance to look around and say, oh, claims adjuster, like, what's that all about? I didn't even know what a claims adjuster was when I graduated university. I didn't have insurance. I was a university student, never paid for insurance in my life. And so it suddenly opened up this whole world that I
Mhm.
didn't even know. And if I had said, no, by the time I'm such and such, I was going to be a whatever, it wouldn't have led me to where I am today. And every role I've had, I've been able to just sort of look around and say, okay, with these skills and the things that I love to do, what can I do next? So for
Mhm.
me, it's never been a job title. It's been a job, or it's been how it makes me feel and where I want to do it, right? So
Right.
what kind of an office I want to work in. I want to be I want to be able to influence people, not an influencer, I wish, but
Mhm.
like to influence people. I want to be able to make decisions and be able to influence that way. So that's actually guided what kind of jobs I've taken, and
Mhm.
it's never really been about the what the next job title is going to be. It's been
Mhm.
about what the next job can offer me and what I can offer that job. And for me, that's what being strategic is about, is really thinking about what's important to you and how and what you need to do to fill the gaps to get there, what experience, what people you need to know, what you're willing to do. And maybe it means taking a step, I'm going to say backward, even though it's almost never backward, in
Mhm.
order to get there.
Mhm. So true. Like I think about my own career. I was actually at a friend's house on the weekend, and her 21-year-old daughter was there, and she was going into going to university for kind of, she's done a college diploma, now she's doing a university degree. And she's saying, I just don't know what I want to do, and I'm not sure. Like, I'm hoping that I'll be able to get a job. Like, you are so at that age, right? You're making choices based on what's going to give me the best possibility for a job. And I said to her, you know what, like in your 20s, take some career risks. Like it's
Hmm.
the time to try things. Don't get yourself locked down on something, because I found, the more kind of taking steps backward, trying new things, it opens you up to all those experiences. And if you're curious and can follow the threads, you can find yourself in very, very interesting places, right? Harder to do. Like I think as you get older, risk starts to take on a different tone when you're in your 40s making big career moves. Would you say that, or would you still kind of, do you think that there's something to, my husband keeps threatening that he's going to walk away from his job and start his own private practice. I'd be all for it. I'm just not sure if it's right for him right now. Um, do you think that there are stages and times of our career that it's easier to do some of these things than others?
Yeah, and I want to say I love that you use the word being curious in your career. I think that's like the key if you want
Mm,
to have a squiggly line career. For sure, it is easier when you're younger because you have less, I'm going to say, to lose. And I'm
right.
doing air quotes when I say that, because maybe don't have a partner yet, maybe you're not paying a mortgage, maybe you don't have children yet, maybe you do, maybe you don't, and you also look and you say, I have a long career, I have a long life ahead of me still, right? You're not on the other side where you're like, I actually have fewer years than I've already had. And so it does feel a little bit more limitless when you're in your 20s.
Mm,
Having said that, there are tons of people who didn't even have a major career or the career that they're known for until they were well into their 50s. Like, I use some of these examples in my book, like Julia Child, right? What do we know Julia Child for? She was this famous chef that had this TV show that taught people how to teach French. She didn't even know how to do that until she was in 50s. Like
yeah.
she already had a life before that, right? Colonel Sanders and all sorts of people. I reference some of them in my book because it's not too late. It
Yeah.
really depends on how you identify what the next move is, risk, and what you're prepared to do in order to do that. So if you're a person that's like, I don't want to lose a penny of my
Mm,
savings, I don't want to give up any of my evenings or weekends, I don't want to have to go back to school, I don't want to have to meet new people, then probably switching careers is not the right thing for you to do,
right.
whether you're 20 or whether you're 50.
Yeah.
Although that's a whole other conversation we'll need to have about why you're like that, but that's a whole other thing. It really depends. So I say to your husband, if he wants to do it, go for it.
No, I got to get him to work on his stability. We, as we use all these assessments, and one of his very high needs, motivational needs, is stability. He likes to have the
Uh-huh.
plan. So I keep always kind of telling him, okay, well then let's just make a plan. Let's just make a plan. Anyway, it's so true. And you have to know within yourself, right, what's going to really work for you. I love that advice. So for anybody on the call, as we're sort of winding down now, anybody who's interested in approaching, adopting more of a squiggly line approach to their careers, where can they start other than buying your book? Highly recommend, buy the book. But
Thank
what would
you.
you say to them?
If you're nervous about a squiggly line career and you're not quite there where you want to switch professions or switch industries, what I would say is look within your own organization right now to say, what
Mm,
can you do within your own organization to create an internal squiggly line career? So
mm,
maybe you work in accounting in your current role, or and you want maybe you want to take a stint in operations, or maybe you work in marketing and you're like, maybe I'm going to try human resources. And so what I would do is talk to the people within your organization, your human resources people, your boss, the boss of the department that you might want to try, and talk about how you can get a foot in the door. Either it's by volunteering on a committee, or by taking a mat leave replacement, or an acting assignment. Try and create your own squiggly line career. The worst they can do is say no. And you're no worse off than you are now, right? The best they
mm,
can do is they'll say yes, and you'll discover you'll love it or you hate it, and you know you can cross that off of your list and do
mm,
something different. So that's an easy way to get started, is just to look internally. If you want to do, if that's not a possibility, you want to do a little bit more, volunteer with an organization that
mm.
has you doing something different where you can gain more skills. But if you're not even sure, you're thinking like, I do want to do something different because I'm kind of a little bit bored of life. I'm kind of meh about everything, but I don't know what I want to do. I have an exercise in my book. I'll just talk about it really quickly if everybody wants to try it. And so what I recommend is in the middle, take a piece of paper, like a blank piece of paper, in the middle, write new role. And then from there, draw spokes. And at the end of each spoke, write the name of a job you've held in chronological order. So for me, it would be like mailroom clerk, claims adjuster, revenue manager, like in chronological order. For each of those jobs, write 3 or 4 things about that job that you've loved.
Mm.
Okay, so for me, it was networking and mentoring and influencing. So it wasn't like that for every job. In some jobs, it was something different. Some was like the salary. And so what you do is when you do that for all of the jobs around, a pattern emerges of what's important to you. Right. So
Mm,
that's how I knew what I wanted to do next. It wasn't a job title, it was the kind of job that I wanted,
yes.
because the same words kept coming up for me, right? Mentoring, networking, coaching, the same words in every job that I've loved kept coming up, even though that wasn't the job that I had. It wasn't my job title. I wasn't called a coach, right? And so I look for jobs that allow me to do that,
Yes.
even within human resources. So now I'm the senior vice president of human resources for a commercial cleaning company, and I can do that in this job. But there might be another job where maybe I'm a VP or CHRO of human resources, but I might not be afforded the opportunity because of the way that the organization is set up. So it's not just the job title, it's whether you can do what you love and you can be good at in that organization.
I love that. And I think the other thing that that does for you, especially if you're, you're in a company, is it really does allow you to have a lot more clarity when you're having career conversations internally with your manager. You can start to say, hey, you know what I know is I really love this. So if there's an opportunity for me to do more of this kind of work, I would love the opportunity to do that. And I love this idea of kind of shifting from the paternalistic mindset we have around like the company looking after our careers to more of this
Yeah.
idea of shared success, right? Where we can step up and say, hey, this is where I think I can contribute really well to the
Yeah.
organization
And
based on
don't
what I love
assume that your
doing.
boss knows, because your
Yeah.
boss may
Oh,
not know. We were
yeah.
like, oh, they should know that I'm good at this. How do they know? They're focused on themselves. They got other
100.
things to worry about. Make it
So
easy for
true.
them. Yeah.
It's so true. Well, Angela, thank you so much for being with us today. And everybody, do pick up your copy of the Squiggly Line Career. We'll be sending out a link next week with a summary of this session and everything else. So, but thanks for being there or being with us. And so just a few lasting kind of words from our side. So again, if you're new to the roundtable, we do group coaching, group mentoring, team coaching, anything about groups coming together, building your collective strength as a leader. Come and talk to us. We're currently enrolling our Roundtable for Leaders program for fall. And I think we're going to have one potentially in winter because we've only got 3 seats left for the fall now. This is a director VP level cohort. Doesn't matter where you're located across Canada. This has now become a global program. So feel free to reach out to Shelby if you'd like more information. And coming up next month, oh, there's my book too. too, which Angela already plugged, so we'll keep going. But
Behind me here.
yeah, I know. It's been on display. Coming up next month, we have Michael Buck, who is the CEO of the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion. And boy, are we going to have a hot conversation next month as part of Pride Month festivities and everything in between. So I hope you can join us. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you again, Angela. It was a great conversation. Went way too fast, as always.
Thanks, Glain. We're
Thanks.
feeling energized. Lovely to
Yeah,
talk to you.
absolutely. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.